How do you handle exceptions, like the excuses for missing midterms and handing in assignments late?
I think on this issue, you have to make some judgment calls. There are going to be individual differences, and some people may need to have an extension and so on. And as long as you're fair, generally, if there's an excuse related to sickness or family emergency for an individual, that sort of thing, then I would allow exceptions. But the students would be told that at the start of the course, so they're clear on it. Otherwise, generally, I wouldn't make allowances. I might find, for example, though, that let's say they've got 3 other assignments due in other courses the same day that mine is, and I could afford to defer it for 3 days or something, then sometimes I'll do that as well. There's no sense in putting that kind of undue pressure on the students. But in the exception of those things, or with the exception of those things, generally I wouldn't make those allowances. The key here, I think, is fairness, and that you're treating people fairly.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, but it brings me to a different answer for what we do. In trades, I think the root of where this comes from is the bidding process, that when somebody submits a bid for a job, it's turned in by noon on a certain day, and then the bids are handed in closed, and they're not opened until 12:01. So you cannot bring a bid in at 12:02 and have it accepted. So we use that as kind of an excuse, so that, very, very low acceptance of things late. And if that's spelled out at the outset and students are given plenty of warning and reminders, I find that works well. It just gets to be a habit of handing things on time. Now, admittedly, and most trade students are not facing multiple classes, so they're not having to keep a number of instructors happy. So that they're with one instructor, just having to complete the assignments for that one class. So that does set up a bit of a difference there for sure. Obviously, if somebody's got a family emergency or medical problem or something, we will deal with that. And I think fairness and consistency are a huge key there. I do, rather than give chances for resubmissions or things like that, I often make students an offer that if you want to hand something in a little early, I will be happy to read it over, comment on it, give it back, and you can make the corrections and submit it for the deadline. But I don't like to do it afterwards, but I'm happy to do it beforehand. I just reviewed 2 cutting list assignments last night, actually, for that reason. Yeah.
My view on that has really changed over the years. I used to be a lot more rigid about it when I started off, and over time I've become more relaxed. I find it's easier on me. But I think that with time also you get a really good sense of the students that are sincere in their requests and those that are just kind of trying to play you a little bit. And so for those that are sincere, I mean, let's face it, things come up. Things come up in our lives too. And so I'm not going to stand in the way of a student. Maybe, for example, one of my students once had a competition, and it was really important to him, and so he was going to miss a week of class. Well, as far as I'm concerned, that's important, and so we made arrangements and adjusted things for him. And the other part of it is that I will allow students to resubmit things, especially earlier in the term, with the view that their learning is something in process, and the editing part of work is really important. So if we view it as a kind of editing thing where they take something that they've received feedback on and they incorporate that feedback and then resubmit, I would maybe give them a maximum of 90% of the full mark that way. So it's not that they could get full marks on it, but they'd get a portion of what would have been a full mark with the first submission. And students really like that opportunity. So because sometimes they've had a bad day, or they've just totally misinterpreted a question or something like that. So it just gives a little bit of understanding to them.
Yeah, I would echo what Karen just said. Flexibility, but fairness, and a balance between those 2 things. And I'll tell my students that up front. I acknowledge that they have lives and they have things happening. I tell them to try and be proactive, so if they know they're going to experience some difficulty, to come and talk to me beforehand. It makes it much easier to deal with. And cases are individual and they're hugely circumstantial. And I too apply a bit of a penalty for a resubmission. And I ask them too to think about, the impact of giving them a special set of circumstances to work under, in fairness to all the other students. Like, why should we be doing this? And usually, if they've got really good reasons, I'm completely flexible. Yeah.
Well, I hope that what I'm teaching students is that in a business context, they hopefully wouldn't be working completely in isolation, that they would give their work to someone else to elicit feedback before that final date anyway. So it's a similar sort of process. It's just that maybe the final date is not quite as final in the classroom context. But I really think it's important to get comments and feedback from colleagues. And so if that's built into the course structure, then it's something they learn as well. So.